When I turned onto my street that Friday evening, I thought someone had parked a dump truck in my yard. Then I realized something much worse. My front lawn was gone. Where there had been grass that morning, there was now a towering mound of dark brown mulch, easily 6 feet high, spreading across nearly the entire front yard like a landslide of shredded wood. And standing beside it, arms crossed, smiling like a man waiting for applause, was the president of my HOA, Garrett Spence. He looked genuinely pleased with himself, like he had just improved my property, like I should thank him. For context, my name is Trevor. I'm 53 years old, and I spent more than 2 decades working as a civil litigation paralegal in Nashville. My job for 22 years was simple: help attorneys build cases, evidence, liability, paper trails, the kind of details that decide who wins in court. So when I stepped out of my car and saw 40 cubic yards of mulch illegally dumped on my private property, my first reaction wasn't anger. It was recognition. Because in that moment, I understood something Garrett clearly didn't. This wasn't landscaping. This was trespass. And the man standing there waiting for my gratitude had just created a legal disaster that would cost his HOA and eventually himself far more than a lawn had ever been worth. But to understand why he thought burying my yard was a good idea, you have to go back 6 months. Back to the moment Garrett Spence decided my grass was a problem. Stonebridge Meadows is the kind of suburban neighborhood where everything is carefully maintained. Clean sidewalks, perfect fences, HOA newsletters about mailbox colors. You know the type. I had lived there 4 years without a single issue. Until Garrett Spence became HOA president. Garrett ran a contracting company out of Brentwood. Big guy, confident, the type of man used to telling crews what to do and watching them do it. Some people handle small authority responsibly. Others treat it like a crown. Garrett was the second type. My first letter arrived in the mail on a Tuesday. According to the HOA, my lawn had an inconsistent texture profile along the streetscape. I remember rereading that phrase 3 times. Inconsistent texture profile. Translation: my grass looked slightly different from my neighbor's. That was it. The lawn was healthy, green, mowed weekly. But apparently, the grass species wasn't identical to the houses beside me. So the HOA fined me $150 and gave me 30 days to restore uniform aesthetic compliance. Now, after 22 years in litigation, vague language jumps off a page. And this was vague. Dangerously vague. Because the HOA covenant never actually defined what uniform aesthetic appearance meant. No measurement. No standard. Just opinion. Which meant enforcement could become arbitrary. So instead of paying the fine, I responded the way I had seen hundreds of attorneys respond before. Documentation. I sent a certified letter asking for 3 things. The specific measurable standard my lawn violated. Proof that standard had been communicated to homeowners. Evidence it was being enforced consistently. Perfectly reasonable requests. Garrett's response arrived 2 weeks later. Another fine. This time for $300. Plus an administrative review fee. But the real problem was the sentence buried near the bottom of the letter. It said, "The board's aesthetic determination is final and not subject to homeowner challenge." That sentence told me everything. Because legally, it was wrong. Completely wrong. HOA boards cannot invent authority that doesn't exist in their governing documents. Garrett either didn't know that or assumed homeowners wouldn't. Most people would have paid the fine. I didn't. Instead, I called someone I trusted, an HOA attorney in Nashville named Priscilla Horn. We had worked together years earlier on a property dispute case, and she knew HOA law better than anyone I trusted. Priscilla reviewed everything: the covenant language, the fines, Garrett's letters. Her conclusion was simple: the rule Garrett was enforcing was too vague to hold up legally. She wrote a formal letter to the HOA explaining exactly that and requesting the fines be vacated. Professional, clear, legally precise. Garrett never responded. Not to her letter. Not to the legal analysis. Not to the request for documentation. He ignored all of it, which, as it turned out, was the first of several decisions that would make his situation dramatically worse. Because Garrett didn't like resistance. He liked solutions. And apparently, in his mind, he had just found one. While I was at work on a warm Friday afternoon, 3 landscaping trucks arrived at my house, each carrying mulch. A lot of mulch. By the time the 3rd truck finished dumping its load, 40 cubic yards of it sat on my front lawn, 6 feet tall, covering nearly the entire yard. And Garrett Spence was standing there waiting for me to come home. When I stepped out of my car that evening, Garrett walked toward me with the confidence of a man delivering good news. "Trevor," he said, smiling, "the board approved a landscaping remediation for your property." Remediation. That was his word. According to Garrett, the HOA had authorized a complimentary beautification initiative. Once the mulch was spread and the lawn reworked, he said, my property would finally comply with community standards. And the fines, those would disappear. He said all of this like he was doing me a favor. Like dumping a small mountain of mulch on private property was an act of generosity. I listened without interrupting. Years in litigation teach you something important. The first rule of a conflict is simple. Never show your reaction too early. So I nodded, told him I appreciated the update, and went inside. Then I called Priscilla. She went silent when I described what happened. Not shocked, calculating. Finally, she asked one question. Do you have photos? I did. From the window, from the driveway, from every angle. The mulch pile, the trucks, the work order Garrett had tucked under my windshield. That work order turned out to be critical, because it listed 3 things clearly. My address, the landscaping company, and authorization signed by Garrett Spence, HOA president. One piece of paper linking the entire operation together. Priscilla's next instruction was simple. Don't touch the mulch. Not a shovel. Not a rake. Nothing. Because that pile was now evidence, and it needed to stay exactly where it was. Monday morning, she filed a civil lawsuit. Trespass. Unauthorized alteration of private property. Negligent property damage. 3 defendants were named. The HOA, Garrett personally, and the landscaping company that dumped the mulch. But while the legal process started, the mulch stayed. Day after day. It sat there, heavy, wet, crushing the grass beneath it. A professional landscaper inspected the damage and confirmed what Priscilla already knew. Grass suffocates under that kind of weight. Soil compacts. Moisture builds. Roots die. Within days, most of my lawn was already dead. And every morning, I walked past that pile to my car. Every evening, I came home to the same thing. A 6-foot reminder that someone had decided my property wasn't really mine. Priscilla sent a formal removal notice. 72 hours to clear the mulch. Garrett ignored it. 3 days passed. Then 4. Then 7. The pile remained. By the time a crew finally returned to remove it, 11 days had passed. 11 days of damage. 11 days of evidence. And an updated repair estimate that had grown to over $11,000. Garrett probably believed the situation would fade away. That eventually I would call. Compromise. Work something out. But he misunderstood something fundamental. I wasn't frustrated. I was documenting. And the longer that pile sat on my lawn, the stronger the case became. 8 weeks later, everyone involved found themselves sitting in a mediation room in Franklin, Tennessee. 3 defendants, 4 attorneys, 1 extremely expensive pile of mulch. Garrett arrived looking confident, like a man who still believed this situation was exaggerated. His attorney opened the discussion with a predictable argument. The HOA, he said, had acted under its beautification authority. The mulch delivery was meant to resolve the compliance dispute. Good intentions, miscommunication, that sort of thing. Priscilla let him finish. Then she calmly began placing documents on the table. First, the work order, signed by Garrett, authorizing landscaping on my private property. Then the photos, 11 consecutive days, each showing the mulch sitting on my lawn, each showing the grass beneath it slowly dying. Then the professional damage assessment. Then the updated repair estimate, $11,400. Finally, she asked a simple question. Can you show us the covenant provision allowing the board to physically alter a homeowner's lawn without consent? Garrett's attorney flipped through his documents. Once, twice, then stopped. Because it wasn't there. It had never been there. And in that moment, everyone in the room understood the same thing. Garrett hadn't enforced a rule. He had invented authority the HOA didn't have, and used it to alter private property, which is called trespass. From that moment forward, the entire tone of the mediation changed. The landscaping company quickly signaled interest in settling. Their attorney understood exactly how a jury would view a contractor dumping 40 yards of mulch on a homeowner's yard without confirming authorization. The HOA board members began asking their attorney quiet questions. Garrett stopped speaking entirely, because the paper trail told a very clear story, and none of it favored him. The settlement negotiations lasted most of the afternoon. By the end of the day, the outcome looked very different from what Garrett had imagined months earlier. The HOA agreed to pay the full cost of lawn restoration, $11,400, plus my legal fees through mediation. The landscaping company contributed additional funds tied to the extended damage caused by the delayed removal. They also agreed to update their authorization procedures for work on private residential property, which meant future homeowners wouldn't face the same situation. Garrett himself faced something more uncomfortable: a formal, written apology. Part of the settlement, signed personally. His attorney made it clear refusing would be far more expensive. So Garrett signed it, reluctantly, and the fines against my property completely vacated. But the consequences didn't stop there, because the settlement required something Garrett hadn't expected: a full legal review of the HOA's aesthetic enforcement rules. And the results of that review were about to create a second wave of problems for the board. The independent legal review confirmed what Priscilla had argued from the beginning. The HOA's aesthetic rule was too vague to enforce, which meant every fine issued under it was questionable. When the review summary was sent to homeowners, 14 residents immediately challenged their own fines. 11 of those fines were thrown out. Just like mine, Garrett's beautification campaign had suddenly become a liability problem for the entire HOA. 3 months later, Garrett Spence quietly resigned from the board. Neighbors later told me he described the situation as an overreaction from a litigious homeowner. But the public court record told a different story. One that started with a man dumping 40 yards of mulch on someone else's property without permission. My lawn took several months to recover. The soil had to be repaired. New grass planted. But by spring, the yard slowly returned. By early summer, it was green again. Standing in my driveway one evening, looking at that lawn, I thought about the day Garrett had waited beside that mulch pile, expecting gratitude. He had imagined a simple outcome. I would give up. Pay the fine. Let the mulch be spread. Problem solved. But that version of events required something important. It required the homeowner not knowing his rights. And after 22 years in civil litigation, that was never going to happen. Because authority only works when people accept it. And sometimes the most powerful thing a homeowner can do is simply understand the rules better than the person trying to enforce them. So I'm curious, if someone in an HOA ever tried to change your property without permission, what would you have done? Let it go, or fight it the way I did? Tell me in the comments.